morning. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Good. Thank you from driving from Sunset Zone 8. Raise your hand if you drove from Sunset Zone 8. How about 9? Yay! How about 14? That's a shorter drive. Okay. 7? Great. See, that's my coded question to get some background on how many of you know what Sunset Zone you live in. So how many didn't raise their hands and they didn't drive from any Sunset Zone? Okay.
They get confused about Davis.
Davis is very strange, yeah. So I put my presentation together today to include a wide range of Sunset Zones to talk to you basically peer-to-peer, because as master gardeners and veterans, you've had hours and hours and hours of training on these topics already. So I'm putting the bar rather high for you. And in that way, we can talk about E.T., and you know right off it's not the little guy from the movie, right? I used to use that joke in the 80s when I first started, and people got it. And now, except for people more our age that do get it, they just look, or they're getting on their phone, E.T., what's that? So we're going to be using it in the context of evapotranspiration, and I'll be talking about what to do to keep your current landscape healthy and perhaps even thriving, even under drought and even under 1 day a week or whatever other irrigation restrictions that you might have. So if you're interested in taking out a lawn entirely or doing some other things, then my friend and colleague Stephen Swain, who's speaking after me, after lunch, only lunch separates that conversation, then he'll be talking to you about that topic. So, and the Water District, Julie Sayre Edmonds will be talking about where we're at in the drought. So hopefully by the end of the day, and with your peer-to-peer sharing, you'll have a good idea of some things that not only you can take home, but better yet, ways that you can help address inquiries from the public regarding the drought and what recommendations are best to be made, what they can do to prioritize their trees over their turf, things like that. Here's my first question. Raise your hand if unequivocally you can say we're out of the drought.
Tell us what your definition of drought is.
Good question.
It depends.
I love it. I love it. Give her a gold badge. The best answer ever. It depends. We tell our master gardeners in Southern California, in fact, it's on their test, every question you get requires on average 10 additional questions back, right back at you. Do you realize that? I put that on their midterm. I said, if the ultimate question is, how long should I water my turf? Don't answer it unless you say it depends. And then you need to find out what kind of turf, where they live, what the output of their irrigation system is, what the runoff and soil potential is to hold water. So that's what we're talking about. By the definition of drought, we are severely impacted, meaning that about 90% of the state is still well below the equivalent to be out of the woods and not have to worry about water restrictions in the landscape. Julie is going to talk more about the definition from Department of Water Resources, drought-wise, but I did want to mention that there's sort of an overreaction now because Tahoe had a lot of snow. I was up there a lot. I enjoyed it. And in some ways, it may occur to some homeowners that contact you that, okay, we're all right now. But we're really not. We're not in the situation we were on the far right of the top slide back in March of 2015, where you could see almost 90% of the state was in a moderate to severe drought. Over half of the state is still in that condition today. Here's where we're at now. So you can see as of 2 weeks ago, we still are in a very severe drought. You have to remember that when we're looking at our groundwater and the amount of water in our aquifers that's evaporated, going into the 5th year of the drought, we're really getting into some dreaded territory because that water table is so low. We have a lot to make up. focusing back on how are you going to help your homeowners that call you keep their existing landscape thriving, let's look at what we're talking about when we refer to an existing landscape. Here's 3 examples. As of about 2007, we had on the left people that were transitioning, and it wasn't so unusual. So many people that call you may have what they consider a current landscape that is easier to keep healthy under our current drought, even the 5th year, than what you see on the right, which is what I consider a generally traditional landscape, where there still may be half to 3/4, maybe full front, side, and rear yards full of grass, maybe cool season grass that takes a lot more water than warm season grass, maybe hydrozoned like that picture, but perhaps not. So we're going to talk about the difference, because a rose isn't a rose isn't a rose when we're talking about existing landscapes. There's different bars for how much water, obviously, they require. Let's talk about these. Which, if any of those, just by looking at it, would you say is an inappropriate landscape? The top left, the upper left, the top right, this one, this one. Okay. All right. How many of you think that as you're facing it, the top left would be the most inappropriate? Raise your hand. All right. Actually, in this case, it doesn't depend. In this case, it's pretty clear cut and dry. That's the correct answer. The reason is the median strip with turf. That's wasteful of water, and even with our modern technology, our irrigation systems just can't irrigate that efficiently. And the tree doesn't want to be burdened with competing with the water that the turf needs abutting its trunk. So there needs to be a circle of mulch separating the grass, the lawn, the ground cover, the pansies, whatever else one might have planted from the tree trunk. The upper right actually is all right. That's hydrozoned. The turf is small. That particular homeowner doesn't have it in their side or backyard. It's scheduled with sprinklers on a completely set schedule, separate from the other hydrozones. They're actually within the lower to lower mid tier for that particular city.
It looks though that the planting is very much uniform, so you've got sort of a desert for insects, even though it doesn't quite fit all the criteria.
Criteria for?
Balanced, sustainable garden.
Okay, the question, I need to repeat the questions because this is, yeah, we're talking about water today. We could talk about attracting wildlife and all kinds of other topics, and that does come in here, but I'm going to stick pretty much to topics. So if you're looking at hydrozoning to be able to conserve water, yet still have a certain amount of turf, if it's still wanted and useful, the top right one is fine. The bottom ones obviously are anywhere from existing for a few years to what we call the new California landscape. And of course, they fit the criteria, of which we're going to get into some detailed discussion about. Okay, what about these? Comments on the top left? It's bricks.
So it's permeable? Or is it?
It's impermeable.
Well, I mean, are they mortared together? But if it's
Yes.
brick and it's not.
There's no way for the water to go into the soil. All right. You master gardeners, you're so smart. You can go home now. You got your hours. It's impermeable, so that's a real problem. The tree, however, is all right because it's been on drip irrigation for about 4 years. And so what the homeowners did is remove their lawn, and they did something that if everybody did that, we'd have a lack of oxygen. We need oxygen to live and breathe. Do you know that a 5 by 10 swath of living material provides enough oxygen for 4 people? So overreaction to the drought, where we're concreting over our landscape certainly isn't the answer. The picture on the right, what's wrong with that?
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, the picture on the right, it used to have a statue of a Buddha there, and then the Buddha got vandalized, unfortunately, and graffitied, so they removed it, and this is left. But the turf was never in an appropriate place. Do I need to say no more? It's just in an inappropriate place. So, right plant, my mantra, right plant, right place. Otherwise, it's a weed, by definition. A plant out of place is a weed. One person's tomato in your lawn might be considered a weed, but that person wishes they had all tomatoes and no Bermuda grass that's growing under the sidewalk into their lawn from yours. The bottom line is, hopefully, the plants were selected correctly. Right plant, right place. Hopefully, the homeowner realizes that there's different climate zones in California, and he or she selected plants according to their sunset rather than a USDA zone, unless you're in a colder climate. USDA zones are great for cold climates. I've been in California since 1984, but I went to college at University of Minnesota. Sunset zones were worthless there. We just wanted to know, when can we put our shorts on, go outside and play tennis? May 15th, yay! The problem, though, is USDA zones are very, very large. Most of California is in 9A or B. Do you think your landscape is similar to San Bernardino? In some ways, yes, but in California, we say there's some differences. So in San Bernardino Riverside, we have sunset zones 18 and 19. Here, a lot of you are in 14. Some of you are in 9, 8, 7. So we do have, within the larger climate zone, areas by which plants need to be selected accordingly. So when you get an inquiry, either via email or phone, that's one of the first questions, and I'm sure that this is the direction that you take the person. Where do you live? Or, better yet, where is the plant that you're asking me about planted or growing? I've heard our master gardeners going on and on. Somebody says, oh, I live in Lancaster, and the master gardener goes through about 20 minutes of descriptions of plants. Oh, it's from my grandmother's house. She lives up at Lake Arrowhead. So it's important to find out where that plant is in the ground when you start answering these questions. So irrigation scheduling involves applying the right amount of water at the right time. It's quantity and it's scheduling. Again, here you have something that has liberal and very good use of mulch, and then you have a hydrozone of turf. This is something that I know is all review, but some of those that are viewing this online may want a quick recap. What factors are involved in irrigation scheduling? These are the factors that generally have the most emphasis on determining how effective a plant's going to do under a given irrigation schedule. So, sure, plants vary in their evapotranspiration rates. They require different amounts of water based on the plant's transpiration rate and based on whether the soil has mulch and whether the soil is a heavier texture or a lighter texture and its drainage. Mulch soils have, in general, a lower evaporation rate than those that are not mulched. Soil water holding capacity is related to that. Water infiltration rate. How fast does the water move through the soil? Plant rooting depth and the system output. Anytime your irrigation system puts out water faster than the soil can take it up, you're going to have runoff. So in theory, you could know the exact amount of water that a plant requires, yet apply it at the wrong time, waste water, perhaps due to the runoff that's containing chemicals and fertilizers, end up with some water pollution issues. If you have a sandier soil, you won't have runoff, but if the water's being applied really quickly and the sand can't stop it, it's like a straw, the water could end up below the root zone, and any pesticides, nitrates and phosphates that are carried in that water then also end up in the groundwater. In either case, the plant is not getting that water. So it's much more than just knowing the transpiration rate and the water replacement rate of the plant. It's also knowing when to put that water on. We talked about the difference among species. There's two other things, too, that even with the same species is going to create a different situation by which it requires different amounts of water. One is the density of the planting. In general, the more dense it is, the more water that overall that dense landscape is going to require. Also, the microclimates. What are some microclimates that you have around your home? Shade.
Morning sun versus afternoon sun.
Morning sun, afternoon sun, buildings, construction. Somebody over here? Wind. Slopes. Okay. Those are all excellent examples and very common examples of differences, bless you, in microclimates.
Are you okay with questions during your presentation?
Yeah, if we get behind, I'll clip it up a little bit.
It seems like a third thing that none of us ever consider because it's fairly difficult to get a handle on is mycorrhizae, because they really help plants bring in the water too, and yet we never take that into account.
Okay. Mycorrhizae, we do take that into account in sustainable landscaping and very much in the way we irrigate. If we're irrigating correctly, then the soil drains well, yet holds enough water, and therefore you have normal mycorrhizae relationships unless you have pure sand. So we have species, microclimate, and density. Here's the grand old ET equation. Just to remind you, the evapotranspiration rate of a given planting depends on how much water the actual plant or plants take, proportionally to a large swath of cool season grass that has unlimited amount of water. That could be annual rye or tall fescue. It's usually ryegrass growing around our semistations. So we consider that all plants use a percent of that, generally a lower percent. So crop coefficient, for instance, for a moderate using landscape might be half to 3/4 of that the cool season grass uses. So why am I talking about this? What difference does it make? The difference that it makes is that we need to know within our climate zone how to irrigate those plantings, and we need to know that in July, across all the climate zones in California, the plants have the highest water demand of the whole year, and that's very, very important. The semistations take into account these 4 factors: solar radiation, temperature, wind speed, and relative humidity. Those are the factors that drive the transpiration rate of the plant. There's a semistation. We have over 100 of them that are up and operating throughout California. Each one of those is in its own climate zone, and it's sitting in a large swath of cool season grass. So you could go onto your computer, go onto the SEMA site, and for the site that best matches the climate in which a caller is inquiring about, you can find out what that ET rate is of the grass, and then tell them that if you have a high water using landscape, go straight with that rate. If you're using a moderate rate, because the hydrozone is of moderate importance as far as spreading the water around, but not high, then you would use about half of that. If that planting is very drought efficient, then you could go down to 10 or 15% of that. Here's the CIMMYS map of California. You can see that these numbers are different than the sunset zone numbers. And this confuses people right off the bat. And it should. It is confusing. These numbers are not comparable nor do they have any kind of relationship whatsoever to the zones that Sunset's mapped out by number. They do by evapotranspiration zone or area, but they're numbered because they were created by different people. Basically, the information's the same. What I think is real illustrative of how water demanded changes throughout the year is to look at a graph like this. You can see that the area that we're in here, in the Sacramento area, that we have a much higher water demand in July than in San Jose or San Francisco. San Francisco is the most buffered in the state, aside from the coastal zone just west of it. And then you have a much flatter curve. Here's something to keep homeowners on their toes about. Going into fall and winter, do you see how that curve drops off so drastically? In general, those are the months in which we see the most Phytophthora root rot, the most overwatered plants, because people simply forget to decrease the number of minutes that their controller's telling their zones to water. Going into the spring, we usually don't have that problem because the plants will tell the homeowner, I'm thirsty, I'm droughty, my leaves are droopy, I need water. You don't see that as much going into the fall. So even if you could convince homeowners on a seasonal, a quarterly basis to change how long they're watering, we would decrease on average unnecessary water waste by 20 to 50%. That's a lot. We talked about evapotranspiration rates, and in general, those do have a tight relationship with the true water need of a plant. When I first started my job in the 80s, I was young, I was in my 20s, I was very idealistic. And my career goal was to figure out what the ET rate of like 200 to 300 trees in Southern California was. And at the age I am now, I thought, that's not bad. Run the Master Gardener program, figure out water use of trees. None of this has been published. I'll call that a decent career. Well, we had the other drought in the 80s. Remember that one? It went on 7 or 8 years. It was perfect for my plots. I had plots, several areas of Southern California, and we did just that. We determined the evapotranspiration rate of a lot of trees, shrubs, and ground covers. After the 8th year, a light bulb came on, and it was, Janet, you know what? This is great, but it's not the bottom line. What's the most important point is how low can you go? How low can you go and keep these plants healthy and happy? And particularly when we're not producing fruits or vegetables, so we don't have certain fill periods by which a fruit that's developing has to have water to produce a crop. It's not as important with ornamentals. So we found out from further research that even that tree on the right, that ficus tree, did really well with 20 to 25% of the water that it would suck up if that water were there. Now, there's a couple caveats. It only works if those trees over time are used to that scenario. What happened last July? A lot of people, they cashed in their grass, right? Cash for Grass program. Did most of you have that in your area? In July, go on vacation, read a good book, go to the beach. Don't rip out a perfectly good landscape and plant natives that you'll never have to water. It sounds good. It doesn't work. Did you get a lot of calls about that? Master gardeners in Southern California couldn't pick up the phone or couldn't answer emails fast enough. Homeowners said, to heck with that UC Riverside plant sale. The plants died on me. Well, what were they? Okay, the species is okay. You planted in the fall? July. That was the deadline for the cash for grass. So remember that there's two take-home messages. Sure, there's differences between and among species when it comes to water use of trees, but the difference between, for instance, a mesquite and ficus isn't this. It's more like this. And more trees die from overwatering when they're mature than from underwatering. More plants, even native and drought tolerant, die from underwatering than from overwatering until they're established. So that's a real take-home message. The other things to consider are that the same species requires different amount of water in what we call a heat island or a person's backyard or a park. The same species planted with some kind of a landscape or some kind of mitigating reduced heat island effect around them take only about half the water that those same species would take in the situation on the left. That's out in Palm Springs. We have a home there and another one up in Santa Barbara. This is about a mile from our Palm Springs house. I measured the temperature based on the re-radiated heat by that white SUV on a day in July where the ambient temperature was 121 degrees. Who wants to guess what temperature it was increased to because of the re-radiated heat? I wish I had books or t-shirts for you. I don't. But your tape, you'll be on screen, taped forever with the right answer. We could get your name, something like that. Raise your hand if you think it was at least 121.
Yeah.
Okay, keep your hands up if you think it was at least 125.
150.
Who said 140? What's your name? Mary who? Mary Goliner. You're taped with the almost right answer, 141, but that's within the standard error, so you got it. Excellent. Yay. What county are you a master gardener in?
Shasta?
Shasta County. Go Shasta County. That's fantastic. Great. That's exactly what it was. So we have this re-radiated heat, and that species does fine. It grows well there, but you couldn't swap out a species that otherwise needs more mitigated of a landscape. So some species work well there, some don't. The picture on the right also illustrates a heat island, but it's lighter colored. It doesn't have nearly the amount of re-radiated heat. Here's another one. What's fantastic about that one?
White.
It's white. What else? Mulch. Was that Shasta County again? Oh my goodness. Would you hear? I'll hand over my mic and you can do my slides and I'll go eat my lunch early. Mulch is fantastic. Just make sure it's clean of insects or diseases. You don't want to spread those. Make sure it's from a trusted arborist or from a city yard that has clean material. 3 to 4 inch of bark chips, fantastic way to decrease evaporation from soils by about half. A lot of water can be saved. Shade versus full sun, that's another microclimate. Sometimes master gardeners will call, and have you ever thought that a little knowledge is dangerous? Think of a field where you know a little bit but not a lot. Mine would be in electricity. So you don't need to know more than that. I'll just leave it to your imagination what might have happened. But master gardeners were calling and asking me what to tell homeowners that said, I have an idea. Since plants require only about half the water and shade as in sun, I'm just going to plant them all in the shade. So well-intentioned, wrong answer. Most plants obviously require full sun. Only about 5% of your plant palette in the areas that you garden are truly shade lovers. So keep that in mind. Back to turf, I want to talk about something called the Lawn Watering Guide. It's free, it's downloadable. It's a great way that you can help homeowners know exactly for their climate, for their type of grass, and for the output rate of their sprinkler system, how much water and how long to apply it to their grass. Which is more water efficient, warm or cool season grass? Warm is more efficient. Therefore, it does fine on 60% of the amount of water that, if unlimited, would be sucked up by that cool season grass growing around the semi-stations. So you're going, well, that's weird. How come cool season grass is 0.8 of what it needs? It gets back to what I mentioned. In my 20s, I was idealistic, stupid, didn't realize that even cool season grass does just fine on 80% of the amount of water that it would suck up. That's why that figure is different. Here's something else to consider. Turf, lawn, 4-letter words, I know. A lot of you hate this stuff. But I want to talk both sides of my mouth and tell you objective research-based information. Warm season grass, if irrigated perfectly, is pretty gosh darn drought efficient. What happens, though, when you're irrigating your lawn?
Over-irrigation?
There's a lot of myths in over-irrigation, miss-irrigation. So when you're talking about turf, the advantage of is kind of like a crop of turf. So if each and every one of you was a separate turf plant, you'd have your own power, you'd have your own decision-making process as much as you could. I don't know what turf thinks or feels, but you could. But you'd require your own water, right? Compare that to a tree. Let's say that in the center of this room that there is a beautiful 80-year-old valley oak. And this is the trunk right here. How far out are the roots on that tree? Way outside. 2, 3, 4, maybe 4.5 times the drip line. If the irrigation isn't perfectly even throughout the root system of that tree, it doesn't matter nearly as much because most of that water is still taken up by the roots and up the central trunk of the tree. That's the difference between warm season grasses and most landscape trees. Theoretically, the water requirement just isn't that much different. It's the fact that what we call uniformity of the irrigation is very, very different. In general, about 25 to 60% of the water applied to lawns is wasted. So that's a real key in this. The lawn, yeah, go ahead.
Research on how to water lawns from the bottom.
How to water lawns subterraneally from the bottom. Some of the systems are getting better. Up until a couple years ago, the systems were great, but the plugging created such a situation that the grass was dying because you can't see what's going on. That's the main problem. So anybody that wants more information on lawn watering, you can just Google. The easiest thing to do is Google UC Lawn Watering Guide. It has tables in it, and these are the key issues. Have a homeowner bear with you because there's a question that's going to pop right out of their mouth first thing, and it's the question that I don't want you to answer except with your sage advice. It depends. All right. They have to know whether they have a warm or cool season grass. They need to know what's the output of their irrigation system. And they need to know their climate zone. And then obviously the month. So this is what you can help them do. There's directions in there by which you can teach them how to place cans about 10 feet apart, straight-sided cans, measure the amount of water in them. That'll determine when they multiply the 15 minutes by 4 that they're going to run the irrigation system. That'll tell them the precipitation rate, which to them you say, this will tell you the output rate of your sprinklers per hour. So preferably they go out there the same time of day, preferably morning, that their system automatically comes on at. There's a couple other things that they're going to determine that otherwise they wouldn't have if they didn't run the can tests. Anyone want to guess what those are? 2 things else that this can test will tell them, besides their precip rate. Yeah.
The watering is even across the area?
Yeah. Donna?
Yeah.
Donna's correct. The uniformity, the thing we were just talking about, one can might average out to putting out a 1/2 inch an hour, and a few cans maybe in the southern quadrant might be putting out 1.5 inches of water an hour. So that helps them determine, wait a minute, there's something wrong with the componentry of the system. I need to fix that. A lot of times you see heads that are supposed to be straight up and they're no longer non-vertical, they're falling down. You see grass, you see weeds growing around heads, all these problems. So that helps as much as them determining their precipitation rate. But it's a better answer for you to give them because you're not saying, I bet your uniformity is really crappy. I bet it's really bad. You don't go there with them. You say, you know what? I'm going to help you determine the output rate of your system, and this will help you determine how long to water. The bottom line here is that 4th bullet. Determine the maximum amount of time to water per event until runoff just starts. So as soon as you see the first little glimmers of water running across the top of your landscape, whether it's turf, ground cover, trees, shrubs, vegetables, fruit trees, look at the number of time, look at how many minutes that was irrigated, and that's the maximum amount of time that you should have that controller irrigating that hydrozone. And then you might have to come in and do what? What do we call that? Water cycle. Where, let's say that, we're going to go to this slide. Let's say that the system put out one of those numbers, but you got runoff, all right? But before that, let's answer this question. How many minutes of irrigation does a warm season lawn need for peak performance per week in July in Sacramento? What's the answer? E, because of all the things we were just talking about, right? These are the actual numbers from the lawn watering guide. So which number would represent a system that puts out only a 1/2 inch an hour? One number is a 1/2 inch, one is 1 is 1.5, and one is 2 inches of water per hour. A would be 2 inches. A would be 2 inches, that's right. So look at the difference in that. 400%. That's a big difference. So what do? You shoot right down the middle? Oh, let's see, 70.5 maybe. So this is really important. A lot of people, for their own reason, for some good reasons, some not so good reasons, want to maintain some kind of turf grass planting. And if it's half or less of their total landscape, and they follow the lawn watering guide suggestions, they should be okay and still be in one of the lower 2 tiers. So it's, yes, E, all could be correct. The rotors, great. These help a lot too. So the systems that can be modernized are another way to even out the amount of water that's being applied, making sure that all of the grass plants are getting the same amount of water. This is the kind of thing, in the desert, we have citizen patrols. A lot of retirees out there. Sometimes I try to get them, instead of being the water cops, to join the Master Gardener program. We've had 3 or 4 volunteers that we've swapped out from the other job. It's really pretty boring, driving around looking for problems. On the right, you see the same amount of water, but applied much more efficiently. So we're talking about improving distribution uniformity to reduce water waste. What's wrong with the picture on the left? It's a slope. What's wrong with turf on a slope or ground cover on a slope? It's really, really hard not to have runoff. It's much easier to curb runoff if you use drippers and you have ornamentals. This is very, very difficult.
Can I ask you a question before you go on?
Yeah.
Since I don't have a lawn, and I live in a county where we don't have too many lawns, are you talking about watering once a week or repeatedly, just using that number?
Let's go back. That's a good question for an answer.
Another question. What do you mean by tiers?
Oh, okay. Some water districts have water rates based on tiers of water use, T-I-E-R, tiers of water use. How many of you are in a tiered water use? Okay, yeah. So for what they consider overuse, you're taxed. City of Irvine, interesting. Their biggest water district down there, Irvine Ranch, 10 years ago, 11 years ago, their manager told me that 3 households, because of their overuse of water, literally paid for their full-time water conservation officer and their water education program. That's a lot of money and a lot of water wasted. That just shows you. It was 3 households in the upper tier. They paid $8,000 to $10,000 June, July, and August, and didn't blink an eye. Okay, so back to the question. Do you think there's any case at all where 1 week in July that the grass is requiring 164 minutes, that would be applied all at once? No, not even with a rock-hard clay soil, because the water would run off anyway. So what about a clay soil that takes up water? No, that's still way, way, way out of range. You might be able, maybe, to get by with 55 minutes, depending on the soil. You're going to water cycle. Water cycle means that if you can only water for 10, 12, 15 minutes until runoff starts, then you divide the total amount by that, and that same day, as close to the first irrigation event as possible, you come in and you reapply the water for the same amount of time, but you don't come in that afternoon when the soil's dry again. You come in when the soil's still moist, and the physics of the soil are that the water will be taken up and it will seep down deeper into the soil. Otherwise, it's called syringing. You don't want to come in 4 minutes Monday, 4 minutes Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and start all over. How many?
Cycles in one day,
It might be
Not
3
in
or
the-
4
but not in the heat of the day.
in the morning, preferably. So you might have to cycle 3 or 4. If you have a clay soil and at 10 minutes you start getting runoff, you're going to have to cycle, if it's B, which would be an inch an hour of your output, your precipitation rate, you have to cycle 4 or 5 times. The other thing during drought, and I'm going to touch on this later, during drought you can divide these numbers by 2. You can keep the grass alive. It may not look as perfect, but it won't die. So keep that in mind, and we'll come back to that. Salvia, it's a great plant for erosion control, and we have all kinds of ground covers. Lots of ground covers that do really well, that are at least as water efficient as warm season grasses. Question?
On your slide, you said lawns and ground covers are more crop-like than mixed species. So, and then you just mentioned the salvias and other ground covers, so I'm kind of confused on how you're defining ground covers
Okay.
as this relates to.
Good question. When I'm talking about ground covers, turf actually is a type of a ground cover. It's one single crop. It could be a crop of peaches or almonds, but it's one species, and it's grown in a large enough area that it doesn't have varying densities and microclimates. And so you can go back and use those crop coefficients or the ET straight up. We're going to talk about with a mixed landscape, you have density and you have microclimate issues. So a crop means one kind of plant, large area, irrigated the same. Thank you for making that distinction. In the bottom, because of poor distribution uniformity of the water, we ended up with brown spots, and the tendency is, oh, I need to go shopping or I need to go do some volunteer work that day, and so you crank up the number of minutes that you're applying water to your lawn. And what that ended up doing is creating rhizoctonia, which is a disease from overwatering on that bottom slide. Okay, so water cycling, we talked about it in grass. A better choice, and when Steve's talking about the new California landscape from a perspective of new plantings, then I suggest that you look at your slopes first and foremost. That's where you're going to lose a lot of soil and a lot of water to erosion. So think about swapping the turf out there for some beautiful plant place, right? Ornamentals that you can drip irrigate, put a lot of mulch around. Okay, let's get back to plant density. This is very typical throughout California. This is actually up here. Do you see why if you just looked at the plant water requirement, one particular species, and maybe you have 5 or 10 of those same shrub species together, that's not all there is to the picture? You have shade, you have wind, you have construction, you perhaps have different soil types that affect the landscape. So in general, when you have what I call these multi-tiered canopies, they're going to use a lot more water than flat canopies that don't have vertical highs of shrubs, trees on top of ground covers and a higher number of leaves, therefore a greater leaf area, which is increasing the amount of water that has to be applied. So this is real typical of condo developments that basically had overnight instant forests, as I call them. If any of you bought a model home, the landscape looks great the first 5 years, and then it's a jungle trying to get into your front door because it's overgrown, it was overplanted to look great right away, instant gratification. Over time, you end up with something like this. Trees should be irrigated, preferably separately and drip irrigated, a long time separately from the ground cover shrubs, and ground cover meaning turf. So what happened last July when people went for cash for grass, took out their grass, and left their trees in the middle of the lawn? Sometimes the trees got forgotten. And that's a real tragedy. So even running a hose out and irrigating once in spring and once in summer very deeply, several feet away on a mature tree from the trunk, slowly getting that water deeply into the root system can save a tree. But you have to wean it off the everyday watering it might have been receiving when it basically was getting most of its water from the sprinkler system for the lawn. Here's another tiered landscape. If you're looking at maximizing water use of plants, then you're going to be looking at low density plantings, drip irrigation, lots of mulch, species that are low watering requiring. State water budget. I have a couple scenarios for your area to tell you what we're looking at. Julie's going to tell you more about this. You don't have to memorize any equations. There's no tests. But I put together a couple examples looking in your area of the greater Sacramento and onto other inland cities, Folsom's included too, that your historical annual evapotranspiration rate is just about 57 inches. So if you look at this MAWA, which basically is maximum applied water allowance at different percentages. So if you have a cutback of 20% or 30 or 50, here's what you can do. So the first example is a cutback of 30%, all right? So 30%, so you have to only irrigate maximally at 70% of the water that cool season grass would suck up if the water were unlimited. If you have in this area a 5,000 square foot landscape, you're going to be apportioned just under 124,000 gallons of water per year. If you had drip irrigated, drought efficient landscape plants, the first year while they're being established, over the course of a year, what would you guess the average amount of water per plant might be in gallons? If it's a very low water using plant, but it's the first year. Would it be 100, 200, 500, 1,000 gallons?
For a new planting?
For a new
It would
planting.
be approximately the same.
It would be between 500 and 800 gallons. After the plants are established, it might be much lower than 500 gallons. But you have to get them established. So you can have a lot of plants for 124,000 gallons per year, right? It's like a checking account budget. So what happened though, last December, DWR cranked the MAWA down to 55% of the amount of water cool season grass would suck up if water were unlimited. Now you're down in your area to under 100,000 gallons of water per year. It's skinnying down. You could still have a little grass and be within one of the lower water tiers. Not more than half the landscape probably could be grass anymore. And then in the rest of the areas, drip irrigation, a lot of mulch. But it's not the end of the world. So if you mulch, make sure it's at least 3 inches thick. That way you keep weeds out as well. It has to darken the soil enough that the weed seeds can't germinate. If half or more of the landscape's drip or hand watered, if it's trees, hand water. Not everybody has automated systems. And preferably warm season grass because it takes about 22% less water than cool season grass. Okay? So this can be done. That's the take-home message. Before we get into the bottom line of keeping various types of plants alive under drought, I wanted to call to your attention some external resources that you might want to use when you're looking at basic, all right, these are categories, and within given restraints, some of them may work, but you still have to consider microclimates and density. WUCLS 4 is a great one. Local water districts have a lot of lists. California Native Plant Society has a chart, and the Sunset Garden Collection has a chart. These will help you look at categories of water requirements of suggested plants. Okay? These talks will be posted. So, and the WUCLs, all of this is referenced in your handbook. So you needn't take all these notes, and we need to continue on here, unfortunately. Okay, we talked about runoff and slope plantings. This is a beautifully maintained landscape, water efficient, drip irrigated. After this is established, it needs very, very little water. But this is Stephen's topic, so I'm going to get away from it. We talked about soil water holding capacity. Look at the difference in a clayey soil compared to one that's sandier. The water takes a lot longer to seep into it, and the water tends to go horizontal as well as straight down. This makes all the difference in the world. The middle soil is a sandy clay loam. The right one is a clay loam. The left is a sandy loam. Which of those would be preferable for plant growth? The middle one. Compost simulates those qualities. Compost is fantastic. It works really, really well. So it holds enough water, yet it drains really well. You want both of those characteristics. How many of you have done the field test? Excellent. Yeah. It works as well as tensiometers. It works really, really well. On the right, you can see that that particular ball of soil is holding a lot of water, right? You can see that this is probably something that you wouldn't want to come in and irrigate right away. The other two are holding enough, but draining well enough. And only until you get to the one on the left is it time to even think about watering. And I would wait another week or so until it's more crumbly. You can also tell from the field test how much clay is in the soil. If you can make an inch or longer of ribbon, then you've got a substantial amount of clay in the soil. So it's going to hold water longer, and it's going to tend to take water in slower, all right? We'd love to see turf irrigated 8 to 12 inches, and more importantly than that, to see trees really deeply watered. How many of you are thinking there's no way with my backyard soil I could irrigate more than 6 inches? In some cases, it's the truth. So what you need to do is to cycle water and keep drawing that water down. For the health of the trees, it's very important. You can get these fancy devices. You want homogeneity. You want soil textures to be the same. So if you have a sandy clay loam, you might want to rototill it and keep it all a sandy clay loam, or add compost. Except if you're going to plant a tree in a hole where you don't have enough root space to support that tree when it's mature. You know what might happen then? It could fall over. It could, based on the species and the difference between the quality of the compost and the worst quality soil around it, it could circle and get root bound. The danger is the worse the soil, the smaller the hole you tend to dig. Yeah. Is that true? I'll tell you my story. I'm in my backyard, and I'm digging a hole to plant a tree, and it's really hard. So I switch shoes, switch shovels. It's still really hard. But darn it, I'm going to get that tree planted. So I ended up, and this is bad, I hope that none of my master gardeners see it, but you end up, instead of making a hole that's 2 to 3 at least times the width of the 1 or 5 gallon container, it's barely big enough, and you kind of squish that plant in there. Some species will hate you forever, and they'll never come out of it. It's a really, really bad idea. But if you make a small hole because the soil's so bad and it's hard to dig in, and you throw a little compost in there, the plant's going to love the compost. But see what I mean? The worse the surrounding soil is, the more prone that plant is to girdling and circling, and they can fall down. Other than that, compost is great. Vegetable gardens, annuals, perennials, or for trees, if you redo the whole backyard and put compost in, it just has to be a really, really big area. Okay, trees. You got to love the almonds and the peach trees when they're in bloom. There's nothing prettier. Peach trees, the smell too. So we're still in a drought. Let's talk about the difference between irrigating edibles, irrigating ornamentals, and irrigating combinations of both of those. Remember what we talked about? It's the recently transplanted plants that are at the greatest risk of drought damage. This time of year, not a bad time to plant. Summer, a bad choice. You as master gardeners recognize signs of drought. A lot of your clientele don't. Bougainvilleas die back from frost all the time. People call, no, it's not drought. They're pretty drought hardy, actually. It's frost. So make sure that they actually are identifying their symptoms correctly. Sometimes foliage simply becomes grayish. That can be a sign of drought. So it's not just the traditional droopy yellowing leaves in a plant that shrivels up and dies. It can be other symptoms as well. Here's some examples. When we look at the specifics, in general, ornamental trees that are established can get through a drought by a deep watering in the spring, followed by 1 or 2 consequential deep waterings in the summer. Those in which they were in a lawn and the grass got ripped out from under them are going to suffer from this. Wean them off of that, get the hose and the drip line, irrigate them weekly, save the water that you would have used for your grass, keep your trees alive. Those that don't have to be weaned off from sprinkler irrigated grass, this works perfectly right off the bat. We're going into the 5th season of drought. The trees are going to become more and more stressed. Fruit trees may not produce, but you can keep them alive. Up in Lake Arrowhead, the other drought in the 80s, pine trees. Right tree, right place, drought. Suddenly wrong tree, wrong place. Trees that are stressed tend to be more susceptible to other abiotic and biotic disorders, living, not living disorders. Do you know what that is? It says up there. Engraver beetle, it's a bark beetle. Stressed trees incur a lot more damage from things like bark beetles. The bark beetle's a little tiny guy, drills little tiny holes, but it can kill a tree. This is what happened. Keep the trees irrigated. It's like you or me. When we're stressed with the cold, the tendency is to just sort of blow it off. Go do your master gardening stuff, take your kids and grandkids to dance, to soccer, to football, have your friends over for dinner, go shopping. Sometimes it works. Sometimes you get sicker than a dog a couple days later, and everybody at your dinner party starts to complain. Was it the food? Was it something I ate? So trees are very, very similar. My husband's a psychologist. We talk about nature, nurture a lot. And we've come together on one fact. Whether it's our children or whether it's our landscape plants. Sure, there's a genetic propensity for excellence in areas in which it either takes brain power or physicality or something. So generally, there's a genetic wall, but about 98% of the time, it's not the genetic wall that creates the boundary of success. It's the environment. So if you can keep these trees alive under drought, then they'll get by. But going into the 5th, 6th, 7th year, it's going to be harder and harder and harder. So baby the trees, give up some of your annuals and perennials. Remember that you want to be irrigating way out. The trunk doesn't need any water. It'll get a crown rot or root rot. Fruit and nut trees, same thing, but you're probably going to lose the crop. Save the tree but lose the crop. In general, during filling periods, from bloom through harvest, all edibles require a certain amount of water to produce a crop. You may not get a crop. You'll save your trees. All of the trees are the same. Citrus, it's very, very difficult unless you can have steady water in summer through fall to not lose a lot of the crop. Vegetables, help me with this. Now dragon fruit is the in thing, the purple smoothies. So we have dragon fruit I can add to my short list of 3. Basil, rosemary, dragon fruit. What other vegetable can you think of? I want to lengthen this list that's drought tolerant. What else? Sage. Yeah, it's a short list. It's a very short list. So tomatoes, beans, and root crops to produce, they need regular watering. Squash, including particular zucchini, can do well on less water, but they're not drought tolerant. But keep your gardens growing, for heaven's sakes. Forget the pansies for a year or two and keep your gardens growing. Only after the water that you first program out goes to your fruit and landscape trees. Shrubs, the same thing as the trees. Spring, another summer of deep watering. Ground covers and turf go down to half of that recommended in the UC Lawn Watering Guide. For ground covers, use the warm season guide. They're usually very adapt to less water than cool season grass. Okay, what else can you do? We talked about mulch. I think California is under-mulched. Mulch, mulch, mulch. What's wrong with that?
With the mulch, insects have a tendency to have cover then and go out and do damage as well. And so,
right.
It's a fine line.
Yeah.
Especially in the vegetables and all, on what you can do for mulch, what's a good mulch, because many times, like your airwigs and different things are going to take cover into that, or if you have
right.
Something that, well, most of them come out at night.
Yeah.
What's a good mulch that is going to help not?
Yeah. And there's two different answers to that. The question was, what about mulch in gardens? In vegetable gardens, mulch until the plant starts to cover. Once the plants start to cover the area, then you can use compost as a mulch. Compost is a great mulch in raised beds. Use compost when you can, except in cases where it would blow away. And then you don't tend to have the problems because you have the right microbial ingredients. Wood chips are great around trees. Compost would be great around trees, but it blows away a lot. So there's no perfect answer, but as far as conserving water, mulch helps a lot. But I personally use compost mulch whenever I can, and I use it on my vegetables 100% of the time. What about this? Yeah, it shouldn't be touching the tree trunk. You want several inches void of mulch and any living things away from the tree trunk. We call that volcano mulches. My favorite one is one that was actually higher than it was broad.
That's how they do it back in like Minnesota.
Oh, I went to school there, sure. They also, they knit socks, and they put socks on their trees, yeah. That's what they do there. That's not what we do here. Sure. Yeah, they have a cold climate. They have other problems than we do. We have the opposite problems. We have all kinds of diseases that can move in from wet trunks. We talked about this. July isn't the time. Go rent a red box. Watch a DVD in July. Don't come in there and plant. Don't over-fertilize for ornamentals. Don't fertilize unless you start to see symptoms on the plants. Too much fertilizer can also lead to pollution of waterways. Iron chlorosis and zinc. Make sure the pH is okay. You might want to apply some elemental sulfur. If you see that intervenal chlorosis, fancy word, you can put it to this tune to a homeowner. The veins are green, the rest of the leaf is yellow. Zinc or iron, maybe manganese deficiency, probably from an alkaline soil, get the pH back to 7. It'll take care of the problem. It's being tied up. Keep weeds out. Get the broom out instead of watering down the cars and sidewalks. All of these publications that you have today are available now as peer-reviewed UC A&R publications, Keeping Plants Alive Under Drought or Water Restrictions, Use of Gray Water in Urban Landscapes in California, and the Sustainable Landscaping one. You've got short versions since they've all been peer-reviewed and improved, and if you just Google those titles, you'll find the newer versions free as downloads online. What I give my master gardeners, they take these notebooks, all their information tables, free downloadable horticulture handouts for the public on drought, and the public can just simply write down the names and numbers of them rather than have a lot of handouts. I wanted to end with just one remark about gray water. If you have a household of at least 3 people, single, or a dual household, Gray water is legal as far as the California Plumbing Code. Cities and water districts can, on the other hand, restrict its use. The best system to use, though, is the laundry to landscape system. If you don't do anything to adulterate the actual plumbing and you're just using the pump directing the water from an external wall out to the landscape with 1-inch PVC pipe, then you can keep 8 to 10 trees. And I want them to be ornamentals and non-edibles. 8 to 10 trees alive with gray water. In your handouts, there's a large discussion of pathogens and qualifiers for use of any reclaimed water. So I'm not going to spend time and get into that issue now, but just know that the water that you save from irrigating your non-edibles with gray water can be used to irrigate with potable water the rest of your landscape that are edibles. You have to have this covered by mulch. You can't come into direct contact with it. People ask how much gray water can be generated. For a side loader, 10 to 25 gallons. A top loader, about 40 gallons. Somebody asked me, well, maybe I should go buy a top loader then. So don't think backward, all right? Another person said, well, I took out my entire backyard, but maybe I should buy a washing machine because I can use my gray water. And I said, no, landscapes are fantastic, and we need them. We require oxygen to breathe. We need landscapes. So get something planted. Don't overreact to the drought. This would be what they would look like. Those are inverted, thick pots to hold the emitter up and above the mulch, and so that you don't have the plant roots growing back into the irrigating tubes. All of these trees and shrubs were kept alive during the drought on a gray water system. Keep it off of edibles. This is an example of a larger complex. Of course, they had to pull a permit for this one, right? This is in LA. It's called Casa Dominguez. The whole complex is irrigated with gray water. Gray water isn't toilet water, nor is it kitchen sink or dishwasher water. It's almost always from the bathtub, from the shower, or the best, and the most legal right now, is the washing machine. It's called laundry to landscape.
You gotta be careful with your washing machine that you don't blow out the pump by pumping too far from your washing machine.
Right, yeah, all those there's about 12 pages of publication material in there that talks about the size and everything. So just know that you need to have it covered up. You need to know your soil type. You can keep, actually more, since this came out, 8 to 10 trees, I would say. And with that, I'm out of time. That's how you can contact me. Most of all, thank you so much for your service as Master Gardeners. I appreciate it.